Welcome back, Focus Learners. So today, we're uncovering the SEC, the cop on the beat. We're going to look right under the hood of the U.S. financial nervous system, and we'll see exactly how this highly unique agency keeps our markets from just spiraling into complete and utter chaos. And the best part? We're going to do it all without the dry legal jargon.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around the SEC, we first have to understand the absolute trauma that birthed it. I mean, think about it. When millions of everyday Americans lost literally everything overnight in the 1929 crash, how in the world did we ever regain trust in the markets? Picture the 1920s. It wasn't just, flappers and jazz. The stock market was a chaotic Wild West. Imagine it like a tumbling avalanche of dry macaroni noodles just flying everywhere. Pure, unorganized chaos. You had rampant market manipulation, shady pump and dump schemes, and undisclosed insider trading happening left and right. Back then, the markets were only loosely regulated by these patchy state-level rules. They were called blue sky laws, and honestly, they were about as effective as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Companies could basically just tell investors whatever they wanted. Then 1920 hit. Boom. Trust was completely, utterly wiped out. So how do you fix that? How do you convince an entire nation to ever invest a dime again?
Well, you have to build a brand new foundation right out of the rubble. Slowly, those broken, chaotic pieces of the 1920s were gathered up and molded into the rigid, foundational pillars of modern regulation. It all started with that devastating 1929 crash, which ultimately led to the Pecora Commission in 1932. This was a massive, highly publicized government investigation that just ruthlessly exposed all those shady Wall Street practices to a very angry public. Congress realized, hey, we have to act decisively right now if we ever want to win back public trust. So, they passed the Securities Act in 1933, focusing on the primary market, which just means new stock issuances. And then the very next year came the true heavy hitter, the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. This is the act that officially created the SEC to regulate the secondary markets, the exchanges, and the brokers moving forward.
Now, what's really interesting here is who they actually picked to run the show. When it came time to staff this incredibly powerful new agency, you'd probably think they'd find the most rigid, by-the-book judge possible, right? Well, actually scratch that. President Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. And yes, that is the father of future President JFK. Kennedy was a highly successful former Wall Street operator. He knew all the dirty tricks of the 1920s because, well, he had used them himself to build his own fortune. FDR famously quipped, "It takes a thief to catch a thief." Think of it like bringing in a master bank robber to design the ultimate vault. They literally brought in the ultimate insider to act as the ultimate outside watchdog.
So what exactly did Kennedy and Congress build? Created in 1934, the SEC is an independent federal regulatory agency, and its macro role is just incredibly broad. They are policing U.S. securities markets, public companies, stock exchanges, and all the financial professionals out there, like your investment advisors and brokers. They are essentially the primary cop on the beat for American capital markets. By enforcing strict standards and cracking down really heavily on fraud, the SEC provides the market integrity that is absolutely crucial to maintaining global confidence in the U.S. financial system. Because think about it, without the SEC acting as a referee, the fundamental trust that fuels our entire economy, it simply evaporates.
Now, to handle this massive job, the SEC was given a specific set of operational superpowers. It's known as their tripartite mandate. Number one, protect investors. This means they're actively out there trying to prevent fraud, market manipulation, and insider trading, so regular retail investors, everyday folks, don't get fleeced by the institutional giants. Number two, maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets. This is all about ensuring transparent price discovery. Basically, that means everyone sees the exact same price at the exact same time, which stops systemic, structural abuse of the trading system. And number three, and this one is absolutely crucial to understand, facilitate capital formation. The SEC isn't just about stopping the bad guys. They're actively trying to help legitimate businesses raise funds efficiently from the public so those businesses can grow, hire people, and expand the economy. It is a very, very delicate balancing act between safety and growth.
So how do they actually pull off that balancing act? Well, they do it through a core philosophy of disclosure over paternalism. This is a massive takeaway for this explainer, so definitely pay attention to this one. The government is not acting like a strict, overbearing parent here. The SEC doesn't look at a company and say, you know what, we think this business model is terrible and the stock is about investment, so the public isn't allowed to buy it. No way. They don't judge the actual merit of the investment at all. Instead, their ultimate weapon is transparency. They force companies out into the light. The fundamental rule is if a company wants the public's money, they have to tell the public the complete, honest truth about their finances. It's this bright sunshine principle, contrasting so directly against that shadowy, totally unregulated past of the 1920s.
And this brilliantly illustrates how they enforce that sunshine on a day-to-day basis. They use a massive public disclosure engine called EDGAR. Every single publicly traded company in America is legally required to file standardized disclosures right into the system. Think of these forms as intricate, highly organized data mosaics, kind of like taking all that chaotic 1920s data and turning it into a perfectly structured picture. First, you have the Form 10K. That's the massive, comprehensive annual audited financial report. This is the really big one. Then you've got the Form 10Q, which is a quarterly, unaudited check-in, just to see how things are going throughout the year. And finally, you have the Form 8K. Think of this one as the emergency alarm. It's an unscheduled report for material events. So if a CEO suddenly resigns, or there's a major merger or a bankruptcy filing, bottom line, if you want to know what a public company is really up to, you go look at EDGAR.
But what happens when someone inevitably lies on those forms or decides to engage in insider trading? Well, it's really important to note the actual limits of the SEC's legal power here. The SEC does not have criminal prosecution powers. They literally cannot put you in a jail cell. That is strictly the Department of Justice's job. So, if the SEC uncovers criminal behavior, they refer it right over to the DOJ. But hey, make no mistake, the SEC is far from toothless. They aggressively pursue civil enforcement. Using incredibly powerful rules like their cornerstone anti-fraud rule 10b-5, the SEC can launch civil suits in federal court, and they seek massive financial fines, court injunctions, lifetime bans for corporate directors, and something called disgorgement. That's a fancy legal term for forcing a fraudster to give back every single penny of their ill-gotten profits.
And honestly, they need every single one of those civil enforcement tools, because modern financial supervillains, they just keep evolving. It's like watching a wild morphing shape of complex fraud constantly changing over time. In the early 2000s, massive accounting frauds by companies like Enron and WorldCom led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. That forced strict internal audit controls and literally made corporate executives personally sign and certify their financial reports. Then, the 2008 financial crisis birthed the Dodd-Frank Act, which expanded SEC oversight to those shadowy hedge funds and created highly lucrative whistleblower bounties. Around that same time, the tragic Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme forced the SEC to completely overhaul their own internal risk examination protocols. And now, today, they are facing digital assets, crypto, and the blockchain. To police this totally new, wild frontier, they're actually applying a legal standard established way back in 1946, called the Howey test, to determine if crypto tokens legally count as securities. It is just a constant, relentless game of regulatory catch-up.
Which brings us to our core historical takeaway for this explainer. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously wrote this quote years before the SEC even existed. Sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. The entire Securities and Exchange Commission was deliberately designed around this exact concept. Let me reiterate. They do not guarantee that a business won't fail. They absolutely don't guarantee that the stock you buy is going to be a winner. But they do legally guarantee that a company cannot lie about their numbers in the shadows without facing severe business-ending liability. They force the financial truth out into the sunlight so you, the focused investor, have the accurate data you need to make up your own mind.
But that leaves us with a fascinating and honestly maybe slightly unsettling question to end on today. The SEC was born from paper ticker tapes, physical 1929 stock certificates, and the terrible fallout of the Great Depression. As we stared on the barrel of decentralized finance, instant algorithmic trading, and completely borderless global cryptocurrency, are regulations built in the 1930s, like the Howey test, truly enough to illuminate the shadowy frontiers of our digital future? Or are we heading right back into a brand new kind of Wild West? It's definitely something to think deeply about as you watch the markets continue to evolve. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll catch you next time.